His superpower is how normal he is.
Is he? I mean, I don't know. I don't know this guy. I mean, is it normal to let your biggest city in your state burn while you're the governor for 4 days?
All right, here's what it looked like on CNN last night when they had their big rally in Philadelphia. CNN actually had a little perch there, like they were covering a convention. Did you see that? And Dana Bash began the conversation with our fave, Scott Jennings, who we like to fanboy over. Started the conversation by saying, you know, Tim Walz's superpower is he's just so normal. And that's when Scott Jennings, well, he went full ninja on her.
His friends told me this morning that his superpower is how normal he is.
Is he? I mean, I don't know. I don't know this guy. I mean, is it normal to let your biggest city in your state burn while you're the governor for 4 days, destroying thousands of businesses, hundreds of millions of dollars in property damage while you do nothing? Does that sound normal? Is it normal for your wife to say she opened the window so she could let the smell of tire fires waft in so they could take in the smells of this radical chaos and anarchy on the streets of Minneapolis? I don't view any of that as normal. I look at this through the lens of decision making. And in 2 cases, they showed us who they are. Kamala Harris absolutely bowed down to the radical left in her party by not picking Shapiro, who is Jewish. There was a nasty campaign run against him. Everybody knows it. No one wants to admit it, but everybody knows it. And she wound up choosing the person who was not Jewish and not as talented and not from the state that she has to win. He did a nice job tonight. Everybody could see why he was the best choice, but she couldn't do it because the party is somewhat awash in anti-Semitism. And for Walz, when he did what he did during the riots, to me, it was him saying, I don't have the strength or the character to stand up to this anarchy. So in 2 big decision points for this ticket, they've showed us they will always bow down to the radical left. So I think if you want to talk about normal, to the normal people in this country, bowing down to the radical left is not normal. It shouldn't be normal, and it should be a flashing red light to the normies of America that this is not the ticket for you.
Yeah, that's right. There's nothing normal about this. By the way, I do want to point out something if you missed it. It tells you everything you need to know about CNN because, listen, we love that Scott Jennings is there, and we love that he does such a good job with them. But take a look at this real fast. And he does a great job. And he's the only reason if you're tuning into CNN, which I know you're not, but you're just waiting to see Scott Jennings clips here. But take a look at the panel. Here's Scott Jennings right here. Okay. Lefty. Faux pretend Republican Alyssa Griffin, who is now a lefty on The View. Dana Bash, host of the show, lefty. David Axelrod, lefty. Jamie Ganglo, lefty. They're all lefties. He's the only one, and he's the only one that makes sense. And he is fearless in laying out exactly what he laid out there. There's nothing normal about Tim Walz, nothing at all. In fact, you heard him mention his wife proudly saying that she rolled down the windows in her house to smell the burning of their own city during the riots. And he wasn't exaggerating.
I would say those first days, when there were riots, I could smell the burning tires. And that was a very real thing. And I kept the windows open for as long as I could because I felt like that was such a touchstone of what was happening.
Yeah, that's the touchstone of what was happening. All right. Safe behind the walls of the secured governor's mansion with armed bodyguards and layers of security fences, I took my windows down so I could smell the burning tires of innocent Minnesotans whose businesses and homes, 1,500 of them, were left in ashes and rubble, their life savings destroyed. But I bathed myself in the incense of black rage and my own white guilt, laying there knowing that the mob could never make their way to my home, which was well protected. These people are sick, and there's nothing normal about that at all. Listen, I'm from Michigan, right here originally. And I know as a Michigander, and I know my Badger friends in Wisconsin, even those Buckeyes in Ohio, which I do acknowledge are Midwestern brothers when I have to, except for that one day a year when our football teams play each other. I know that we know better about this guy. They really believe that this guy is going to appeal to, these just normal Midwestern blue collar, plain speaking folk, right? Because he's not an elite city slicker like all the other Democrats you hate. This guy's the ticket. Really? Really? I have a hunch based on our YouTube stats and based on reading your comments, our Rumble stats, reading your comments at Rumble. I have a hunch that there's quite a few Midwesterners out there, Wisconsinites, Michiganders, maybe even some of you in Western Pennsylvania, which isn't technically the Midwest, but well, we let you play in the Big Ten with Penn State, so you're honorary. I have a feeling you're not buying any of this, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments there, because this ain't working. This guy, you just saw, no normal Midwesterner says what he says, does what he does, and no normal Midwesterner is like his wife there. And there's one thing that Scott Jennings left out of the far from normal litany of things that Tim Walz is responsible for, but I forgive him because it really was just revealed this morning. We talked yesterday about his radical LGBTQ agenda that he jammed through the state via executive order, not via legislation. But this morning, it's been revealed that he actually championed a change to a definition in Minnesota state code having to do with defining sexual preference. Take a look at this. Section 47, Minnesota Statutes 2022, Sections 363A.03, Subdivision 44. It defines what sexual orientation means. Now, I'll hop down to the new language that he proposed. Sexual orientation means to whom someone is or is perceived of as being emotionally, physically, or sexually attracted to based on sex or gender identity. A person may be attracted to men, women, both, neither, or to people who are genderqueer, androgynous, or have other gender identities. Now, most people reading that on the face of it think, yeah, that sounds about right. But that would be most normal people. I mean, you can take it or leave it as to whether what we just read is normal. But what I'm saying is most normal observers to that language of sexual orientation would say, yeah, that about covers it. But that's because most normal, excuse me. But that's because most normal people take for granted that sexual orientation and emotional, physical, sexual attraction is specifically limited to adults. Adults sexually or physically or emotionally attracted to other adults. You see, most normal people take that for granted, so that definition is enough. But I now draw your attention to what's been eliminated from the statute. Because what was eliminated before Governor Tim Walz decided to rewrite normalcy in Minnesota is this last line here. If you can see it. Sexual orientation does not include a physical or sexual attachment to children by an adult. They eliminated that. They eliminated that. Years ago in Minnesota, they recognized that at the very least, as we define what sexual orientation means, and we open up the door to involve so many various new examples of what people are sexually, physically, or emotionally attracted to, and for some reason state law has to protect them. At the very least, let's keep this one line in here that does not allow protection or any kind of acceptance, or let's go back to that word Dana Bash used, normalcy, to an adult who has a physical, emotional, or sexual attraction to a child. The statute used to say sexual orientation does not include a physical or sexual attachment to children by an adult. That was removed. Thanks to normal guy, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. And it did not go unnoticed at the time. This is a Republican state legislator at the time. His name is Harry Niska. This is just last year, by the way. So it's not like, oh, that's ancient history. Oh, that's Tim. Well, that's years ago. Things have changed. This was last year. And Representative Niska took exception at the time.
We heard no good reason not to close the loophole to potentially open the door in some future case that someone could argue there's a protected class for those adults who are attracted to kids. No good reason. We did hear, and I will grant Representative Finke, we did hear good reason not to have it in the sexual orientation definition. I will grant that. I understand that argument. But we voted 126-0 to solve that problem in a different way. And there was no good reason given on this floor as to why we can't do that. What we heard, what we know, is that there are some, maybe in the administration, maybe in the other chamber, who have put ideological blinders on and are convinced or refuse to acknowledge the possibility that they're creating a problem with this bill without that protective language in the bill. But we've tried to work on maybe another solution. And again, that is whether it's resistance in the administration or in the other body, that's something that this ruling Democrat trifecta refuses to do. It's irresponsible. It's reckless. It's dangerous for the future of Minnesota.
Yeah, it is. And by the way, that's normal. That's Minnesota nice. He's way too nice, by the way, given what was being jammed down their throats there. And you heard him talk about the Minnesota Democrat trifecta. That means Democrats were completely in charge of the executive branch in both chambers of their legislature. And that's what happens when Democrats have unmitigated power to do whatever they want. They decide to redefine sexual orientation to not include a prohibition against adults having a sexual, physical, or emotional attraction to a child. But no. Tim Walz is normal. That's what Dana Bash tells me. That's what all my betters, intellectual, ethical, and moral betters in the mainstream corporate-owned media tell me. He's normal. He's just a normal guy. All right. If you're making the case that he's all about normal, then I think it's fair to scrutinize pretty much everything he does, including this moment. Did you see this? It played there while Scott Jennings was talking, but I want to draw attention to it because as the spouses were all hugging and kissing each other, normal guy Tim Walz held out his hand to shake his wife's. She insisted on a hug. What is that exactly? That's normal? It's kind of a big moment, kind of an emotional moment. Put her there. All right, listen, maybe he was just pulling her away from sexual predator Doug Emhoff, trying to get her out of the line of fire there, because we know Doug's history now. Although, to be fair, I think she's a little old for his taste. He likes to go after the babysitter. Moving on, there's a whole lot more normalcy going on with this guy, as Lee Zeldin pointed out at CNN, because he's so damn normal, that Tim Walz. What with the letting your city burn and removing any reference to opposition to pedophilia. You can't get more normal than that. That's just Minnesota normal.
He was talking about loving your neighbors. During COVID, he had a hotline to snitch on your neighbors. There was 10,000 of these complaints that were coming in. And I would say, as far as the weird argument, and keep throwing this weird around, I mean, he was signing legislation that was requiring taxpayer-funded distribution of tampons in boys' bathrooms in elementary schools. So if you want to go there, and we're going to start have a debate about weird, I mean, it's not like he has clean hands here. Again, I think at the end of the day, though, rather than going back and forth on what's weirder, I think we should just talk about who's going to solve the issues that voters say are their top issues for the future of this country.
Well, that's true. But as Lee Zeldin said, if they continue to repeat this mantra that J.D. Vance and Donald Trump are weird and they're just so normal, then maybe we should question why boys' bathrooms in public schools in Minnesota need tampons. Worth a discussion? Explain yourself, Mr. Governor. And would you take that national, by the way, with your role in the federal government? Fair to ask, I think. And yes, absolutely. He made a big point there talking about how in Minnesota, we have the golden rule. By the way, any believing Christian with more than a second grade education knows that the golden rule is to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But yesterday we saw Tim Walz rewrite the golden rule, normal Minnesota style. He told us that the new golden rule that they adhere to is mind your own damn business, which, forgive me, is very different than the Christian understanding of do unto others. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, I assure you, does not translate in any Bible to mind your own damn business. But while Tim Walz was lying to the American people, telling them that in Minnesota he instituted an ethic of mind your own damn business, yes, he literally set up an agency with a 24/7 hotline for people to call into and snitch on their neighbors if they were not adhering to the authoritarian, totalitarian mandates that Governor Walz, with his singular power during the pandemic, instituted, thus destroying children's lives and many other adults' lives as well. One other thing about his actions during the pandemic, he did lift restrictions on funerals, which was a really wonderful, heartwarming thing. I know a lot of you, myself included, had a loved one who died during the pandemic, and you could not go to a normal funeral to mourn over the death of your loved one. And that was awful. It was disgusting. It was despicable. It was inhumane. It was so wrong. But Tim Walz, I got to hand it to him because he's so normal. He lifted that restriction. Well, to be fair, he lifted the restriction once, one day, at one time, for one funeral, the funeral of George Floyd. That was the only funeral that was allowed in Minnesota during the pandemic. And of course, it turned into a political rally. It wasn't really a funeral. But that was okay because it was 2020 and it was the summer of rage and justice. And they had an election to win. See, they needed people as angry as humanly possible going into the November election because up until that time, people were actually pretty happy. And they couldn't have that. How do you defeat Donald Trump if people are happy? So you betcha. Don't worry about the pandemic. You can have your funeral because it's going to be all about rage and race. But that's a nice twofer that normal Tim Walz was just fine with. We finish our CNN analysis with a remarkable exchange over the man who didn't get the nod. You see, this rally was in Philadelphia, and the intro speech was one Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania. And he was great. In fact, he was much better than Tim Walz. He was the obvious pick. As a Republican, I told you yesterday, I'm breathing a sigh of relief today that Kamala Harris didn't do the smart thing, didn't do the brave thing, that she didn't pick Josh Shapiro. Good. I'm glad. Josh Shapiro was formidable. Josh Shapiro would have taken Pennsylvania off the map for Trump and the Republicans. Josh Shapiro would have sent a signal that the anti-Semites who run the Democrat Party right now are not in charge. But she didn't do that. And on CNN, they had a brief moment of accidental truth seep through their analysis. And it's amazing.
And I think ultimately, Shapiro, I think fit is important. But, I also think that when you look at the principle of do no harm, maybe they did say, in a state like Minnesota, do we want to, those 100,000 uncommitted voters who came out about the Gaza war, do we want to antagonize those voters? Those are all part of the questions as well.
So, but can I just say,
now, we'll pause there for a second because the conversation now takes a little bit of a tangent, but Jake Tapper, God bless him, he actually brings it back into focus. But you just saw Abby Phillips there stammering her way through, trying to find the right euphemism. You know, the activists who have concerns about the Gaza war. I love they call it the Gaza war. I'm sorry. You mean the retaliation against the October 7th terrorist atrocity that murdered over 1,000 innocent people because they were Jewish, that still results in the captivity of American citizens as well as Israeli citizens who are being tortured and sexually abused on a daily basis? Is that what you mean by the Gaza war? Activists who have concern over the Gaza war. That's a hell of a euphemism. And thank you, Abby, for having to stammer your way to find those words. I love to know what was going on with the gerbil on the hamster wheel there, running around in her brain, trying to come up with the right way to put it. And now watch, we'll go off on a little tangent. And then Jake Tapper says, well, let's talk about Shapiro one more time here.
Tim Walz also spoke conciliatory those people. He said, look, that uncommitted vote is significant and those people should be heard. So having that kind of response, I think, is probably more of an open door to the parts of the party that have been very frustrated with the Democrats.
So, but just to one point on the Gaza war, Shapiro has the same position on Israel that Governor Walz, that Senator Kelly has. He's actually been more critical of Netanyahu than the other two, but he is Jewish.
The viewers of CNN were probably just absolutely shocked. They were probably checking, is this really CNN? Did we just hear something true and frank uttered by somebody other than Scott Jennings and Lee Zeldin? What is going on here? He has the exact, it has to do with the activists on the Gaza war. Josh Shapiro on paper has the exact same record and position on the war and on Netanyahu and on the state of Israel as every other contender for Kamala Harris's running mate. Sadly, lamentably, it's a disgusting position. It's an immoral position. It's an un-American position, but it is the same position as the Democrats. But why is Shapiro different? And there, Jake Tapper had to say it. The only difference is he's Jewish. I love the fact that he said, but he's Jewish. Because that's a problem, you see. And then, again, Abby Phillips tries to clean it up a little bit here, but everyone knows exactly what happened. And even on CNN, the truth had to explode right under their feet, like a flaming bag of dog poop on your doorstep.
He's also the face of the crackdown on the protests, right? He spoke very vehemently about those campus protests as being anti-Semitic.
Not all of them. The ones that were anti-Semitic, he criticized as being anti-Semitic.
He was out front on the issue. So I'm wondering if that's the kind of thing that, again, for the activist wing of the party,
sure, absolutely,
they felt was a slap in the face.
Yeah, it was a slight. Understand what this is her actually trying to, clean it up a little bit for the anti-Semites in the Democrat Party. No, it's not because he was Jewish. It was because he was the face of the opposition of the protests. And Tapper says, well, the anti-Semitic protests. Well, yeah, but because he identified accurately the anti-Semitism of the anti-Semitic protests, well, that didn't wash with the activists in the party. In other words, when you call anti-Semites, you have no future with the Democrats. Remind me again how Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and Republican voters are the Nazis. Remind me again how the man who moved the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem stood by Israel at all costs and actually engineered the Abraham Accords, where Arab nations finally made peace agreements with the state of Israel, how he's the second coming of the Third Reich, how he's the fascist, how he's a Nazi, how he's an anti-Semite, how he's a Jew hater. You know the one I'm talking about, the one whose daughter converted to Judaism and whose grandchildren are in fact Jewish. That's the one. Yeah. Listen, Tim Walz is just a normal guy, man. He's just a normal Midwestern guy with normal Midwestern positions. CNN just told me so. And more importantly than him being a normal Midwestern guy, he isn't a Jew. We're Democrats.